time living playing in one orchestra.
So they're getting around their regions.
They are what I call the driving for dollars musicians. Right. There are ways. I mean, and it's something that I have started to encourage in some of my meetings with board members. I think it's incumbent, if the board has an artistic committee, it's not that expensive. Even if it's a volunteer who's got resources,
they
fine.
could go somewhere and
two
hear
or
another
three
orchestra.
of those people could get on a plane and go hear another comparably budgeted orchestra. But the other thing also is the more and more boards can be gotten to trust their musicians. Very often there's a kind of feeling that, well, I mean, the musicians, you know, they're the employees, they're the professionals. You would never run a hospital where the administrators made all the decisions with no input from the doctors. You would never run a university where the faculty had no input.
Right.
But orchestras often have no input from the musicians.
And the musicians,
if they set up a channel of communications where they could sit with their musicians, and the musicians would say, look, you know, we play in these 5 orchestras, and all of them are about the same budget size. And we have to tell you, this is the least satisfying.
Yeah. And also,
that could mean something.
No, it really could. And this is a huge question because the musicians generally are the most underused resource of any orchestras, especially, I would think, the big ones.
It takes an opening up of the minds of managements, boards, and also musicians, all of them, to understand that we have got to work together. I mean, one of the things that I also did when I took this job was say to the board, please don't engage me for this job at the League unless you accept my premise that the League serves the institutions of orchestras, which means all of its internal stakeholders.
All of its constituencies.
All of its internal constituencies. I don't believe that we directly serve audiences, which are one of their constituencies. We help orchestras serve their audiences. We don't have the resources to serve the hundreds of millions of people or tens of millions of people. But all of the stakeholders, musicians, volunteers, boards, staff.
Right. And when you say you serve the musicians, this is a major culture change. Because the League has always been associated with orchestra management. Yeah. And I know that one of the innovations of your reign here has been to build bridges to the musicians' unions so that they feel that the League knows them, cares about them, and can represent their concerns.
Well, one of the most important things we're doing is for years the League has collected statistics. Up until last year, only managers could get those statistics. All kinds of comparable data about orchestras, finances, and operation. Meanwhile, musicians, because they couldn't get it, went out and collected their own, which often was different. So the first debate at the bargaining table was often...
How are we doing?
Well, but was whose data is right.
Right.
We proposed, first of all, that since we actually knew that the manager's data was generally better, we proposed that we make it available to musicians. Also, by the way, when I went to the AFM and ICSOM and ROPA officials to say, we're here, we serve you too, first question I got was, really? How come we can't get the data?
A fair question,
to which
isn't it?
I said, blah, 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 blah. It's a very fair question. And so I actually got the managers and everybody to agree. But the second part of that, which was suggested by managers, is why don't we work on a project where we reshape the data and get the musicians' input and the managers' input and have only one set of data? But we even agree to make ours available before that happens. So we now have a task force of 2 members of ICSOM, 2 of ROPA. The union can send 2, they only send 1, and 2 managers from each of 3 levels of budgets sizes, so there's 6. And we agreed to not worry about attendance at these meetings by having numerical voting. If we ever have to vote anything, there are 2 votes, a musician's group vote and a manager's group vote. And we hired a consultant, who, by the way, has now become our new vice president for research and development because everybody was so thrilled with him, to absolutely reshape the data. And the thing that I love, Greg, if you came into one of the meetings of this task force and didn't know the people, you would be unable to tell when people spoke whether they were a musician or a manager.
And we better have a moment of silence for this one. That's really remarkable.
It's amazing. It's a big breakthrough.
Let me ask you about the musicians in the smaller orchestras, the ones who are driving for dollars, as you say, who make a living playing for a number of orchestras in their region and probably teaching as well,
sure.
And playing any other kind of gig that they can get. This is not an easy life.
That's correct.
How are they doing now as compared to 5 or 10 years ago? Are their lives, are their incomes getting better? Are they getting worse? Is it about the same?
I would guess in relationship to the cost of living, it's similar. I don't think it's changed dramatically. Maybe there will be some orchestras that have grown where it's better, and there will be some where it's not, where it's worse. On the whole, and this is data I hope that the future will hold that we don't have yet, but anecdotally I would say for the most part it's roughly similar. And it varies. In Pennsylvania, you can play in 5 orchestras. If you're in the Boise Philharmonic, you can't. It's the only orchestra in 500 miles of any direction. And so there it's teaching. And the other interesting thing is, so you can't generalize. There are some musicians that I have talked to who said to me, I could audition for, and I think I could get into a bigger orchestra. I kind of like this life. I like different conductors, different cities. If I want to turn down a gig, I can. I don't want to play 8 services a week for 47 weeks a year. There are other musicians who kill to go to that bigger orchestra.
How old are the people who say that?
I have seen them of all ages. I've seen some young ones, and I've seen some in their 50s.
Because the cynical point of view, or the realistic one, would be the older they are, the more they face college costs for their kids, the more they feel they have mortgages that are urgent to pay, the more tempting a job with a large orchestra might seem.
See, I'm not so sure, because if you play in 4 orchestras, and each one gives 6 concerts, which, by the way, are single concerts, not 4 times a week, you're making, $15,000, $20,000 a year from each one of those orchestras. And then you're teaching on the side. And the cost of living in those communities is nowhere near the cost of living in a Boston or a San Francisco or Los Angeles. I don't know how much worse off you are economically. You're more tired. You're on the road more. And I think and you aren't making music with the most glamorous.
And you're probably having to pay for your and your family's health insurance, which is going to cut down on your income. This would be interesting to know about. I know a somewhat comparable group of musicians, not comparable in other ways, New York City freelancers who play orchestral instruments. They burn out, and the mid-career midlife career changes are rampant among them. Yeah. But this is something we need to know about. Anecdotally, I've heard a great deal, and sometimes could put specific orchestras' names to this, of places where people are working more and making less. Or actually not. No, it's actually worse than that. It's more tricky. Their pay rate is higher. The amount of work is less, so they're making less money than they were. Yeah,
certainly. But, one of the problems is that the trouble makes more news than lack of trouble.
It does, and then we also come back to the lack of data.
Right. Even on a subject that you and I have debated for some years now, which is the question of the aging audience, the data that does exist is largely from larger orchestras. It's not from the under $2 million orchestras. And I have always used as an example the Elgin Symphony, which is an hour west of Chicago. The Elgin Symphony has tripled its number of performances and its budget in 8 or 9 years, and its rate of pay. They actually made a philosophical decision to be the highest freelance orchestra around Chicago, therefore to get the best freelance people. They've tripled they've gone from singles to doubles to triples of each program. And to some degree, and I don't mind saying